Yeah, so this video series is going to be split into 5 parts.
I was going to go through every single year from 1972 all the way to 2025 in just one video, mind you, but listen, that ain't happening. I would also like to add the caveat that for each preceding year, I'm going to give what I think was the most important / influential game, but also give some honorable mentions and my personal favorite for the year. If I didn't play any games from the year, then I would just give the honorable mentions and move along. So yeah, that's basically the premise of this video series. This first part is going to focus solely on the arcade era, with the years from 1972 all the way to 1983. Alright, let me stop yapping and let's just jump into it. Alright, starting with the first generation, we have 1992 with the advent of the Magnavox Odyssey, the very first home console to ever be made. From here to about 1983, most of my picks are going to be just obvious, as I'm sure none of the people in my audience, including myself, was born around this time, so we're just going to say the most iconic video games of these eras. And for 1972, we have no other than Pong, or table tennis. This game was revolutionary for a lot of obvious reasons. I mean, it's the first video game to actually have, competitive aspects to it, other than just visual showcase like most games at the time did. Gaming has gone back way before 1972, as early as at the end of World War II. In 1958, during this year, in October, a physicist from Cornell University called William Higginbotham created Tennis for Two as the first ever video game to ever exist. So when I say a game as simple as Pong, being able to be played at your home at the touch of a button, and keeping track of a score between the two entities, allowing for multiplayer of all things, when I say that this game shook the foundations of this industry to its very core,
you know that I'm telling the truth.
This is what I meant, by the way, when I said until we get to the 1980s, most of the picks on this list are going to be obvious knockouts. I mean, the only other game that was really in contention for this spot in 1992 was Computer Space, the first commercial arcade game, even before Pong. But that wasn't on a home console, and it wasn't nearly as influential as this game. Alright, next up we have Space Race for 1973, and can I just say, this game gives me major Crossy Road vibes. I mean, just look at it. While not nearly as popular as Pong, it was notable for being the first racing game ever pretty much to exist, and Atari's second game on its console. Once again, being a game capable of co-op at this early stages of the industry, this game introduced a new trend in the industry, and that was the advent of sci-fi games on the horizon, or at least the imitation of space and sci-fi with these ASCII symbols. Some honorable mentions this year include Empire, an early multiplayer space war game that were going to inspire future strategy titles, and Gotcha. No, not that type of Gotcha. This one, which just looks weird, but includes the first use of a joystick of all things. Things are just starting to begin, guys. Don't get too impatient. Alrighty, for 1974 we have Tank, and boy, this game is basically Tank Trouble that you've seen on Cool Math Games, but in 1974. So if that's a good game now, you can just imagine the impact it had then. This game is notable because it introduced a microprocessor. Before then, games had to be hard-coded into the logic of the arcade machine or home console, but the microprocessor allowed for games to have far more flexibility in their programming, allowing stuff like physics simulations, such as the shots you see bounce off the walls in this game. Not only that, Tank, interestingly enough, introduced both shooting and movement style of gameplay, something that Space Race was introducing and Pong was also introducing. Because of that, you can say that Tank was the first ever PvP shooting game to ever exist. Isn't that neat? The only other interesting game I could find this year was Grand Talk 10, which was the first racing game to feature a steering wheel, gear shift, and pedals, but that was an arcade game, not a home console, so sorry Grand Talk, you don't get to be the game of the year. $1975 here, and woo, we have another shooting game. Man, why are those so popular with video games? Anyway, like Tank from the year before, this was the first video game to have a microprocessor. Wait, let me read that again.
Midway introduced Gunfight in the late 1975. It's the first game to use a microprocessor.
Wait a minute, wasn't Tank supposed to be the first game to have a microprocessor?
So it turns out Tank was the first game to have a microprocessor in its cartridge, but Gunfight was the first game to actually use the microprocessor. Tank was still running on hard-coded logic like the previous games. Wow, that is a crazy technicality. Anyways, Gunfight itself isn't really that spectacular to me in my opinion. It's just a basic Western shooting game. But what did make it stand out a bunch was the fact that it started using human-like players in its game in a dual-style gameplay loop. That may seem trivial today, but keep in mind, no game at this point had even depicted any living creatures, much less ones this detailed, with arms, legs, a head with eyes, and a hand holding a gun. That being said, the gameplay itself is pretty mid. You just wait for the game to start and you just try to shoot your opponent in a linear fashion. Tank was way better than this. I would definitely play it over this game in 1975. The honorable mention for this year goes to Indy 800, which was quite literally a massive game in the fact that it could host up to 8 players on these tracks. Pretty incredible. For 1976, for our breakout hit, we have, well, Breakout.
Oh, brother, this guy's...
Now, I know you've all seen a game like this, or some variety of it. It's pretty iconic. Basically Pong, but with bricks, and you paddle from below the screen. This game can be considered one of the first puzzle games to ever exist, as you needed good strategic forethought in order to get the ball to hit all of the bricks in the corner. Plus, the game was just immensely satisfying with its archaic sound effects and genuinely addictive gameplay loop. Some honorable mentions go to Death Race, which was a controversial early game where you ran over gremlins, this marking one of the first major moral panics in the industry over violence in video games. And Night Driver the same year, which had this pseudo 3D graphics which made it a pretty immersing driving simulator. All great stuff coming from this year. As you can see, around this time, video games are starting to get more complex with more intricate gameplay loops and better graphics. The picks for each year are only going to get even tougher from here on out, so be prepared for that. Next up, we have 1977 with Space War, which is based off of an MIT classic under the same name. This game was important and influential for a lot of reasons, mostly the fact that it has vector graphics giving it a sharp and smooth visual look, and also featuring state-of-the-art physics-based movement like inertia and momentum in the game. On top of that, it features a robust competitive aspect to it, with its combat system being pretty in-depth at the time. I mean, just look at all these complex modifications you can make to your ship in order to win. This game I consider to be one of the first main RPG-like combat games between players that involves a bit of strategy. The massive elephant in the room honorable mention here is Snake, that was released on the Nokia, and was the first proper mobile game to ever exist in the industry. The reason I didn't consider it for this list is because, one, I would have to do way more research if I'm now to consider mobile games and their influence on the industry, and I just don't want to dig into that can of worms. But yeah, those two games are definitely the most influential, I'd say. Still no personal favorites of mine because I wasn't born until like 3 decades later. Okay, 1978. I know up until this point I've kind of been making it out like a bunch of games were competition, but for this year, yeah, I dropped that pretext. Space Invaders absolutely exploded the industry at this point in time. Pretty easily, mind you. I mean, this game just had so many new revolutionary ideas that it added to the game industry. First, you had the amazing pixel art graphics with waves of enemies selling the alien versus human narrative in fantasy. You then had score-based gameplay, which actually tallied your results in skill, and you could directly compare it to other players. It introduced dynamic difficulty, with the enemies getting faster and more aggressive as time went on, and this is the first video game that can be actually considered a blockbuster in the fact that it actually ruined Japanese arcades because there were coin shortages from how many people wanting to play this game. Space Invaders was just absolutely revolutionary to the industry and probably sparked the boom in sales of consoles at the time. Hell, y'all should probably play it yourselves right now. It's still a fun video game, till this day. Just a really solid experience that laid the groundwork for most shooting games after it to come. (1979) here, and we have another breakout success with Asteroids, which has a striking resemblance to Space Wars just 2 years back. This game, however, sold a lot more than just Space Wars, pretty much being a console seller on its own for the Atari single-handedly. This game had some nice, crisp vector graphics that looked nice on the arcade cabinets in which they were played, and even better on the bright home screen consoles of the Atari 700. On top of that, it had innovative, addictive game physics that pushed your little ship around, creating this nice and addicting shoot and drift gameplay loop. And with the addition of high scores for how many asteroids you can destroy, is it really any surprise that it sold so well? I mean, this was Atari's best-selling game up until 1982. The honorable mentions this year, though, was Lunar Lander, which was the first game that had realistic space shuttle physics with you having to land the ship on these tiny little pixels, and also really pushed the boundary of vector graphics at the time. I mean, look at this game. The animations are so smooth and lifelike, adding to this game's realism. Also, the precursor to Galaga, Galaxian, was introduced and popular around this time, with its color-based sprites and more dynamic enemy movement, but it basically was just a Space Invaders ripoff with slightly fancier design. Alright, we're in the big 80s now, and for the first year of 1980, we have Pac-Man. Really, do I need to explain why this game is so influential? Genuinely a worldwide phenomenon. I mean, this guy got his own cereal boxes, theme songs, a mini cartoon series, and everything. This game was so influential because it didn't just primarily appeal to the male demographic that video games have been building up slowly. It was truly the first mass media appeal game to ever exist, as well as being one of the first video games to feature a mascot character, something that was unheard of in the industry at the time. There was actual characters with a sense of personality like the four ghosts, Inky, Blinky, Pinky, and Clyde. The game has nice depth with you running away from the ghosts during one part of the gameplay, but then being empowered to take them on directly in the other half. It was colorful, non-violent, and easy to understand but hard to master. Basically, this game was a must-play for anybody not just interested in video games and nerdy stuff in general, but almost like a new piece of technology that had to be witnessed. Truly a masterpiece of a game, and definitely the most influential of 1980. The honorable mentions, or poor suckers at the time, was Defender, which was a side-scrolling shooter with fast action and a radar, and Rogue, which was the original roguelike game. Too bad it had to come out the same year that Pac-Man came out. Dang, the knockouts just keep on coming. For 1981, we have Donkey Kong, which was another titan in the industry, shifting things completely. This game was renowned because, one, it had an actual semblance of a real plot, with a damsel in distress, a villain in Donkey Kong, and Mario as the main hero. This is also a game that first introduced the concept of platforming, where you had a character that could jump, and you had to actually jump over obstacles. This being the foundation for basically every other platformer to come, but I know you're thinking of another game, and we'll get to that one. Yeah, this game single-handedly sold over 60,000 arcade units, and put Nintendo on the map as being one of the best video game companies ever, pretty much.
At least until they got to the 2020s, that is.
It got so big that even Universal Studios tried to sue Nintendo over Donkey Kong, thinking it was a ripoff of King Kong. That's how massive the game got. If Pac-Man showed the gaming industry wasn't just a nerdy fad, then Donkey Kong absolutely blew it out of the park in terms of that messaging. Here it was, another iconic mascot video game character. Some honorable mentions for this year include Frogger, a hugely iconic and still instantly recognizable game. I mean, come on, you've seen this game before. And Galaga. This one took the classic ideas of Galaxia, but made them more original with more classic space shooter and arcade elements, mixed with the highly addicting high score challenges and progression of difficulty with each playthrough.
Okay, next up for 1982, we have E.T. for the Atari 2600.
Brother, this
Okay, no, but seriously. For 1982, we have an interesting one with Pitfall for the Activision. This game was influential for a lot of reasons. Number one, it invented the side-scroller-esque gameplay loop that was yet to be refined with you-know-what. And it also had some nice innovative gameplay with running, jumping over crocodiles, swinging on vines, and treasure collecting.
It was a smooth, responsive, and deeply satisfying gameplay loop at the time.
Remember when I mentioned Space Invaders a while back? Yeah, well, this was the game to dethrone it as the best-selling game on the Atari console. Let that sink in. This was truly the first adventure-style game, and it surely influenced many more games to come. Some honorable mentions this year goes to Q*bert, a quirky isometric puzzle platformer with a unique main character, Miss Pac-Man, a game that people consider to actually be better than the original Pac-Man, and Zaxxon, the first isometric shooter, a technical marvel in the industry. For the last year on this list, we have 1983, and for the game I'm going to pick this year, it was not the most commercially successful, but I personally think that this game actually has more influence in the industry today than any of the other games released this year, and that is Dragon's Lair for the Laserdisc. If you're looking at this game on screen right now, you're probably thinking, whoa, how did this game look so much better than like everything else at the time? And the reason for that is because it's the first video game to use full motion video instead of pixel sprites or vector graphics like everything else at the time. This game used a Laserdisc to play full frame hand-drawn animations that looked like Disney quality. Safe to say, it definitely turned heads in arcade rooms. The gameplay itself was also pretty innovative, with the timed decisions, reaction to visual cues, and making split-second decisions that affected the cinematic gameplay. And while there are other games at the time that were more financially successful, like Star Wars for the Atari, which recreated the film's most iconic events as best as it could, Mario Bros., which was the debut of Nintendo's most iconic characters, and provided the player with some satisfying platforming and pseudo-combat gameplay. And Mappy, which is a game I will stand on as a pretty good and underrated gem, another mascot platformer in which you played as a mouse detective cop and had to go retrieve the stolen goods from the cat mafia in this giant mansion. This game slapped so hard and was super charming, I don't care what anyone says. But yeah, that concludes the first era of video games, in which I will call the foundational era. Every video game from here on out had taken some influence or inspiration from the games shown in this video, directly or indirectly. And as I said before, the game choices only get harder and harder as we progress with each year, with gaming becoming bigger than ever and having some of the most innovative and high quality mechanics ever shown. Seriously, it's crazy how we could just go from this to this in only a decade's time. Studying video game history like this is so fascinating because it's the only art form that I've seen progress so rapidly and so passionately over the years. I'm definitely looking forward to covering each preceding year as the games only become bigger and better as time goes on. So I hope you'll stick around, as that was the first part of the best video games of all time. Feel free to tell me your thoughts on what the best games were during these years, as well as like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Peace.